class, and I didn't see where that was going to show up because the final session is 29 and 30. And I realized that all the finals start on Tuesday. That means that we actually still have a class on Monday, so that'll be our 27th class. So we do meet on Monday. I was wrong when I said that we wouldn't meet at all next week except for Friday. So we meet Monday. We do not meet on Wednesday because the room will probably be occupied with someone doing a final. But then we do have a final session, which is really 2 sessions on Friday next week. Not this week, but Friday of next week. And that starts at 10 o'clock. So you'll have to get up much earlier. I almost feel like speaking with an English accent now after listening to him for an hour. But it was interesting watching the subtitles, the transcript following along with him, and how so many of the interesting words that were completely misspelled, like Wittgenstein, for example, was just totally a mess. But in any case, so we will meet at 10 o'clock on Friday, I think the 5th of May. And I did revise the syllabus yet again and reposted it. So if you check it there, that should be correct. And I will be here, and we'll have 2 hours to pretty well finish up the course. But what I wanted to point out too is, thanks to listening to him for an hour, I was watching you guys to see how many of you fell asleep. Because it's an experiment, really, to see how many of you could pay attention that long to a language game, right? I mean, he's explaining, Wittgenstein on language games, and all along, from the very beginning of the class, remember I thought of the whole point of this is immersion in a language game, the language game of philosophy, which has its own family resemblance and rules and things it's my job to try to inculcate in your minds so that you're able to listen to someone like him and follow along and know what he's doing for about an hour without, totally falling asleep. I think it's funny that he keeps thinking that you would spend the night in a bathtub reading Wittgenstein or Descartes or anything, actually. Because most of you, I think, would be reading with an electronic device, which you probably should not have in your tub. I would think probably, do they make any of them that are able to be waterproof? I guess you can. Amazing. Books are not, by the way. If you've never noticed, if you get a book wet, that can kind of ruin it. So, unless it's the kind you get when you're a kid, that are made out of things that are unedible, so that the kids don't eat the books, how that works. Board books, for example, or, the plastic kinds of materials. So that was an interesting experiment to see, if you were able to follow along, because he, of course, mentioned an awful lot of folks, like Descartes, for example. Russell, we didn't really talk that much about, and so I thought, I should give you a little bit of background on Russell, because he was very significant, although, as he mentions, most people don't bring Russell up in discussions unless they're doing philosophy of language, which is still a fairly important element of philosophy in universities. So if you get into universities, you'll, for like graduate work in philosophy, still a lot of language analysis. The 2 schools, the language analysis school or the analytic school, and the ordinary language analysis school, which is based more on the language games model. And if you think of it, that's because, as he was explaining, the earlier version of language and how it relates to the world was really kind of pitiful. The idea that, we can talk about the chairs, the tables, but we can't talk about our feelings or you know, the importance of philosophy and, you know, or God, you know, et cetera. Now, the normal view which he expressed was that by the second point of view, Wittgenstein basically thought, you know, everything was wrong in the Tractatus. I disagree. I think what we do use is that the model of language that you use in the Tractatus persists, with the addition that now we have lots of language games, each of which is using a model like the Tractatus gives us, with, of course, the additional content that the objects could also be abstract ideas in that particular language game, right? But you still will have basic kinds of objects that the language game will discuss, the kinds of statements that could be true or false, right? Or even neither true nor false, which is the one school of thought that he mentioned, the logical positivists that were at the Vienna Circle. Karl Popper was associated with that. Wittgenstein was invited to attend that and disagreed with them. They felt that certain kinds of statements are non-cognitive. So, for example, statements like, you know, when I, as a comparison, when I say this is a cup, everybody agrees, no problem. Yeah, this is a cup. That's, you know, we're all fluent speakers of cup language, right? And so we all know this is a cup. However, if I go the additional step and say this is a good cup, now we have a now we have a sentence that can't be viewed as either true or false, right? Because if you were to say, yes, that's a good cup, that's your opinion, right? And by the way, it's actually not a very good cup in my opinion, because it's me. Despite this fantastic lid, which was closed, right? So you know, it's not a very good cup from the perspective of someone who wants to not leak all, you know, water all over the place. Which I'm glad it was just water and not, you know, Jameson's, you know, because, sorry, it's evil, right? Shouldn't mention something like that. By the way, they're actually banning Jameson's now because Pinot, whoever, they're still shipping it to Russia despite the ban. So.
Is this the alcohol we're talking about, or what is those?
Well, for those of you who are in the language game of Jameson's, nobody? Nobody.
What are you talking about? I think you were talking about alcohol, but okay. Jameson. I know what I thought. See,
Okay.
he was
Oh,
just
it's a
being weird.
whiskey.
It's funny. Like that's like those weird.
Oh, it's a.
He like makes, you know, like with Barnes and Noble.
Okay, it's not a ban. What are they calling it? How about a controversy? Well, that's not working either. Let's see, they're still selling it to Russia.
Oh.
And as a result, some folks are
They're probably selling a lot of things still to Russia.
boycott. That's what they're doing. So they're doing a boycott, which, you know, that's why I was joking about that.
Oh, Bailey's and Guinness still?
So
Say it right here.
I didn't want to encourage anyone to. I mean, you're way too young to be drinking Jameson's or Jameson's, however you pronounce it.
How do you pronounce it? How do you say it?
Well, remember, I don't think there's a correct pronunciation of any Woy.
Oh,
You listened to A.C. Grayling, and he said a lot of things that you would not have said, because the pronunciation he used was slightly askew
White.
of ours. Pardon?
White. Like, now it sounds like white instead of right. I was gonna say
Well, that's
right.
part of the whole business of fluency and language games. We shouldn't even think of language games within the context of simply English. I mean, English, you know,
English is hard.
English and American, you know, are really two different things, right? American,
American, I like saying
American, you know, that's, you know, the
America.
two countries separated by a common language. That's a joke, because it was originally said that there are two countries separated by a common ocean, the Atlantic. But then it becomes a joke when you say by a common language, as if there's a big enough difference between speakers of English from England and speakers of English from America that we don't understand one another. We get into trouble because of those differences. You know, those different things. Like he said, perambulator. I had to point out, you know, that's a baby carriage. You know, because we don't say perambulator for a baby carriage. We don't say bumbershoot for an umbrella, which in Russian is Zontik, which in German is a Regenschirm, and in French you can have two different kinds of umbrellas. You could have a parapluie for the rain, or you can have
Japanese rain is ame.
a parasole, you know, for the sun. Keep the harsh sun off your fair skin, you know, etc. And what is it in?
Ame? No, that's not for umbrella. I forgot what umbrella is, but rain itself is ame. But also candy is ame in Japanese too.
I was tired Monday after class and had stopped at Cars to buy some things and in Eagle River, and one of the employees there now is a lady who is a Ukrainian woman who's camping out here while the war is going on, I guess, something like that. But she doesn't have any English, so I've been able to converse with her because my Russian and Ukrainian really is very similar. But I was tired, so she came up and we said hello and everything, and she pointed out that the elephants were going to be waking up soon. And I was like, the elephants? Why is she talking about elephants? And then I realized, oh, no, Medved is bear, not elephant. So
The bear.
that happens, you know, when you're, but we shouldn't just think about English when we're talking about these language games, nor would you even limit yourself to, say, the nation as having a language game, with, in some sense, that certainly would be true, but your family might have something that would be specific to your family that you could talk about among the members of your family, but your friends might not even understand it because they're not part of the way.
In a lot of different places, like in Japanese pizza, and I think in Italy pizza.
And they're constantly dynamic. So
Yeah.
so in that sense too, the Hegelian idea of this organic, dynamic interplay. By the way, I hope you also noticed how so much of what he was talking about fits the pragmatic philosophy that we just briefly talked about, you know, with Charles Sanders Peirce, the idea that the whole pragmatic issue is the meaning of a word is its use in the language, you know, and of course the dynamic and growth of how we're still doing that. This was obviously a couple of years old, not only, you know, by the date, you know, if you're checking it, but he referred to Hollande as the present king of France, which he isn't. He's the prime minister, but today that would be, wow, why am I not remembering the current?
It's just called Prime.
Yeah, I mean, I just watched him doing stuff just the other day, and I know him, not personally, but I mean, he's been the Prime Minister now for a couple of years, actually, and I can't think of it, but he's cool in any case. But, so this was an experiment on how well you've adapted to this fluent language, you know, how fluent you've become in this language game, which was my goal. By the way, you can keep working on it. You know, I don't know if any of you have decided that philosophy is just so fantastically